Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie. Hello and welcome to The Money Factor. I'm Richard Naylor, your host. Our topic today is water economics, and our guest is John Frazer. He's Superintendent of the Latham Water District. We're going to learn a lot more about the district itself, and we're going to talk a little bit about the economics of water. Welcome, John.
Good morning, Richard. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm really excited about it.
Great.
You made a comment after a staff meeting that it would be great if people knew more about water. We tend to take it for granted.
We do. That's unfortunate because as the water supplier, we take it very seriously. And it's funny, when we have a water main break on a street and we have to shut the water off, that's when people, I think, appreciate the fact that they have water. In that case, they don't have water. So we try to do every day. I suppose if we do our job well, then there are no issues, but it's sometimes those days where there's a little bit of a glitch, a water main break, and we have to shut the water off, that people really do notice the importance of water in their life.
It's a little bit like the electricity. When we have a power outage, suddenly the switch isn't there, and we're still, like, after 3 hours, we're still trying switches as we go into a room. But it
is. Obviously I'm a water supplier, so I take water supply very seriously, but all of our infrastructure is very important, whether it be electricity, water, sewer, transportation, the road system, bridges. When we have a backup when people complain about construction backups, the infrastructure has to be maintained. So we're in the same boat. From time to time, we have to shut the water off to maintain our system as well.
Well, let's demystify Latham Water a little bit. Let's talk about how you do it. Why is it even called Latham Water?
It's called Latham Water because originally it was designed to service the hamlet of Latham, what was known affectionately as Stop 38 on Troy-Schenectady Road, some of the older streets to the south of Troy-Schenectady Road, Latham Circle. That was the original water district. And then over time, over the last 83 years, we've expanded the district 161 times, and we do that annually. So we'll have another extension of the water district this year.
So you just gave us the age, 83. What date was that? That would be
1929, actually. Late in 1929 is when the district was established.
Interesting. That's the Great Depression.
Yes, it was.
At the same time.
Yes. And in fact, a lot of the infrastructure was already in place, built privately by private developers at the time, and the water district took some of those systems over as well.
Okay.
In addition to our own facilities.
So some facts about it. How much water do you pump a day or a month or however you measure?
Well, last year we pumped almost 4 billion gallons of water.
Billion?
Billion, yes, with a B. Delivered to 23,900 services, and we serve approximately 83,000 people in the town. We don't cover the entire town. We cover about 2/3 of it. But as I said, with the extensions on an annual basis, we'll be limited to the town boundary, but eventually we might get there with development if it continues, especially in the north end of town, where we've seen a tremendous amount of development along Route 9.
Now, I've seen photos and, excuse me, and I've had a tour of the facility on the Mohawk River. Mm-hmm. Could you describe that a little bit? Because it's not like you stick a spigot into a water source and pump it to somebody's house.
No, that's right. It takes a lot to treat the water. We have 3 water supplies. One is the Mohawk River, and that's our primary source of supply. We also have wells along the river, and then we have the Stony Creek Reservoir up in the town of Clifton Park.
Now, are those natural wells, or are they?
No, they are drilled wells.
Okay.
About 40 years old. They were drilled when the plant was built back in the 1960s. One was built in the 1980s, but for the most part, the infrastructure dates back to the 1960s.
And they've been maintained, or they're maintaining themselves pretty well?
We maintain them. Once every 5 years we get in, pull the pump out of the well, send a camera down, have a contractor in to clean the well out, because they do develop deposits on the screens. Groundwater has naturally occurring deposits like calcium and magnesium. They deposit on some of the pieces of the well, so we have to go in and maintain those.
So the Mohawk, the wells, and what was the other one?
And the Stony Creek Reservoir up in the town of Clifton Park.
Okay. Do we have some kind of an agreement with Clifton Park about that?
No, we own the property the reservoir is on, including some of the watershed to the reservoir.
Oh, nice.
As well. And then we own the piping system that runs through Visscher's Ferry, across the Mohawk, through the town of Niskayuna, eventually reaching our water treatment plant at Onondaga Road.
So it sounds like to me that we talk about us being in the center of the Capital District, but we're also well placed in terms of water.
We are, not just transportation-wise, but for water. Even back in the 1960s when we had the real severe droughts, the Mohawk River still had adequate supply. So back in 2005, we upgraded our water treatment plant and increased our permitted capacity from the river. So we've kind of got our eggs in that basket, and we're confident that the river will have enough supply into the year 2025 at least, and our plan was designed to deliver water to the residents of the town through that year as well.
So what does that mean? It runs out at 2025?
No, we've just made our decisions, our planning decisions, sizing of the water treatment plant on year 2025. That was 25 years into the future. So we looked at that planning duration.
Okay. So you were looking at some growth measure?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah. Based on what we had seen up until 2003 when we first began the work, we saw that 2025 was a reasonable approach to look at what kind of development would we see in the town of Colonie. And quite frankly, our flows have not increased as much as we thought they might.
Interesting.
Yes, our average day demand, you asked a little bit earlier about our demand. Our average day is a little over 10 in 2012, a little over 10 million gallons per day.
Still sounds
it was
like
only
a lot of water.
It was only 9.8 the year before.
Okay.
So we haven't seen a lot. And really it fluctuates with the weather.
Okay.
The drier the weather is, the higher the flows. People use a lot more outside, whether it's evaporation in the pool, irrigating the lawn and landscape. So in those years, we see the flow go up a little bit, but our average day has not gone up substantially since we built our treatment plant upgraded in 2005.
So let's describe the treatment process a little bit.
We have a multi-stage process. We take the water in as raw water. We add chemicals to it, including sulfuric acid, to lower the pH. We add a coagulant. So we take it from chemical addition to a rapid mix, where we mix the water with the new chemicals to create a nice homogeneous solution as possible. So we then take it into a flocculation process where we now mix it a little bit slower. So the chemicals we've added to the water connect to the materials that are in the water, and then that flocculation process just brings those things together a little bit more until they're a nice big, what we call a flock, and they want to settle out of the water. So along with the chemical comes all the bad things that are in the water that we have to remove on a daily basis. It goes through a sedimentation process where that material is allowed to settle out. And then we send it through our filters where we clean it up a little bit more, actually a lot more. When we get out, our turbidity, a measure of the cloudiness of the water, coming into the plant can be as high as 40 or 50 on a daily basis, sometimes even higher on rare occasions. And then we take it out to it's less than 1 ppm of turbidity left, part per million left when it comes out of the filters. And then the final process is some more chemical addition, including caustic soda. So we've brought the pH down in the first part of the process with the sulfuric acid. We bring it back up with the caustic, and then we add chlorine to make sure it's safe to drink.
Now, with that description, that's a lot of processing. And I was going to save this question until almost the end, but now I have to throw it in right here before we finish the process. People worry about water purity, and they go and they buy little plastic bottles of water. But from what you're saying, if you just take water, there's no real pure, perfect water source. So it sounds like Latham water is at least as good as bottled water.
Well, we'd like to think so. And it's a lot less expensive than bottled water.
Well, like 1,000 times, right?
Correct. We'll deliver 1,000 gallons to your tap for $2.85. And what's a bottle of water cost? $1.59,
Depends on the size.
Depends on the size. For 23 ounces. Frank, I don't drink much bottled water, but it's much more expensive than we can deliver it right to your tap.
So that's pretty interesting. So I think of the people who try to save the waste of the bottles are not really sacrificing their health at all.
Correct. That's correct. And bottled water, although certified by the state of New York, we test the water right to your tap. Bottled water, once it leaves their manufacturing plant, no longer gets tested. So however long it sits on the store floor or whatever, there are some dates on it. But we deliver it and we test it monthly. Actually, we test every day and report to the health department on the quality of the water delivered right to your tap.
So that sounds encouraging and makes me feel very confident.
Good. That's good.
So we've purified the water. Is that pretty much the process? I mean, it's somewhat technical, so I'm sure people can't fully visualize your operation. I know there's some very large basins and some tanks.
Yep, all that part of the process, a bunch of 14-foot deep by 20 feet wide by 60 feet long tanks. We have 3 of those called our sedimentation basins. All those processes. Back in 2005, we spent $24 million on just an upgrade. So the plant was built in the 1960s. In 2005, we completed an upgrade that cost us $24 million. Wow. We have a staff of 13 people. The plant is staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. So it's a rather substantial operation. And we pump every drop of water that we deliver to our customers twice. We pump it out of the river to our water treatment plant, and then we pump it out of the water treatment plant to deliver it to the storage tanks that people will see like along Troy-Schenectady Road.
And we used to see up on the hill
at
by
Latham.
Latham
That's
Circle.
correct, yes. That tank has been removed in a joint project with the Airport Authority back in 2007.
So help us understand a little bit how you would pump water so far and why you need the tanks.
Well, we need the tanks so that we can help modulate the demand during the day.
Is that gravity? Is that why they're there?
It is. So we pump up to the tanks. They're all at the same elevation. And then during the parts of the day where demand is really high, approaching lunchtime, early in the morning when people begin to get up, shower,
right,
take care of their daily
7
business.
7 to 9,
Yep.
6 to 9.
7 to 9. We start to see demand in the system increase. Instead of increasing the pumping rate at the water treatment plant, the water will come out of the water storage tanks. And then at 3 in the morning, when nobody's doing any of that stuff, or very few people are,
right,
the tanks then begin to fill,
okay,
and they're ready to go the next day.
Now, it sounds like magic, but I'm sure it's not.
No.
How you coordinate that process of the tanks and the pumps?
Well, gravity takes over for the tanks. So, we have lots of systems that monitor the elevation of the water in the tanks.
Is that automated, or?
No, we can see the numbers. We have all the data coming back to a central location, actually 2 central locations, one at our main office and one at the water treatment plant. And both of those locations are monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365.
So you've actually got people who are watching the flow and saying, okay, we need more water. Let's bring the tanks into the mix.
Yes, correct. Well, the tanks are there all the time.
Right.
We just decide whether or not we need to increase our pumping rates to fill the tanks. Maybe it got a little bit lower. Maybe yesterday was a little bit higher in demand. So today we need to add a little bit more water to the water storage tank so that we're ready the next day.
Okay. Now you got the tanks. How many pumps does it take to get? Because you've got all these elevations in the town and so many places, streets to go under.
We do. There's a lot of elevation change in the town. We start at the river at about 184 feet above sea level. We pump all the water up to 500 feet above sea level at the top of our water storage tanks. And then if you go down Watervliet Shaker Road, Troy-Schenectady Road toward Watervliet, toward Manans.
Now you're going down.
Now you're going downhill again, so the pressure increases. The pressure is dictated by your relative location, elevation, to our water storage tanks. So the closer you are to the water in our tanks, the lower the pressure is going to be. As you move down those hills, you get further and further away from that water level in the storage tank, so your pressure increases. And we have areas in the town that are over 100 pounds per square inch of pressure.
How is that relatively? How can we understand what that means?
Most systems, especially modern day dishwashers, clothes washers, are all designed nowadays to run more to 80 pounds per square inch.
So you got like 25% over.
Yes. In some areas. Some areas we actually have less than 80, so you're okay. But in those areas where you're over 80, we have required that the residents install pressure reducing valves so that the pressure doesn't go over 80. And when I say designed to, the hoses and the connections inside these units don't like to see pressures of 100 psi. They're just not designed to handle that, especially if there's a little bit of a shock or a little bit of a water hammer in the pressure. So we've started recommending that anybody with a pressure of over 80 psi should have a pressure reducing valve installed.
So how do people know? Does everybody already know if they do? Or is that something that we just turn on the light and turn on the water? And
if you're a new permittee to the water district, we will tell you when you take your water permit out that one's required.
Okay.
Often, unfortunately, because the system is so old, there are lots that are not. We usually find out about those with complaints about water leaking from new hot water tanks when somebody's installed something new and there's an issue with leaking water somewhere. That would mean that the pressure is a little bit too high. If people come to us, we can give them an idea what their pressure is and let them know if they should install a pressure reducing valve.
It's not required, but it's highly recommended.
It's required for new homes, but not for the old, because we don't want to get into the situation where we've got new homeowners with all new devices in their house and they've got a pressure problem. because it's too high.
And could that damage the equipment, or
It could.
just doesn't?
A leak would indicate some damage, so
Okay.
you don't want to get to the point where you've got a leak coming from your dishwasher.
Right. Now, we're all used to these gauges, big ones or small ones, outside, inside. People used to have to go inside. I remember when I was a child, people would come into the house and flashlight and write things down. How do we do it today?
Well, unfortunately, we still have lots of those old meters, okay? But we do have a new meter that uses radio waves to transmit the data to us. So where a customer used to have to read the meter and report on the card and return the card to Latham Water, we now have a device that we can read from the street. So no longer do we have to spend money on the mailer to the customer. The customer doesn't have to spend their time reading the meter, and they don't have to spend the time returning the card to us.
Is it accurate?
It is. It's as accurate. The American Water Works Association has standards for accuracy of water meters, and all the water meters meet those accuracy standards, and they're the same accuracy standards we used to have. The only problem is meters, as they age, kind of like we do,
Right.
slow down. So we'd like to get the new meter in.
So they underestimate the water
They do.
usage.
So they
Okay.
underestimate the water usage. Correct. Correct.
So is there a requirement that they be checked periodically?
There is, and we will do that automatically. Once we see a water meter's 20 to 25 years old, we will replace it. In fact, now, because we have the new radar read meters, the automatic meters that we can read from the street, we like to replace meters that are more than just 10 years old.
So you get the upgrade.
So we get the upgrade, yes, and the cost savings that goes with that. Without the mailing of the cards to the customer, we can save quite a bit of money in return mail as well.
Okay. Now I want to circle back a little bit because we talked about the difference in water usage from the tanks. But I know from looking at the website that you you also take water from different places depending on the season. Help me understand, or help us understand that, why you do that and how you do it. Seems like the Mohawk River, it gets really strong in the spring, and if you go to the falls in sometimes it's barely there.
Well, anecdotally, the guys at the water treatment plant tell me that the Mohawk River is much cleaner than it used to be, and I think we've seen that in some of our data. So we are using the Mohawk River almost completely as our water supply. We do modulate temperature a little bit in the winter with water from the wells. We haven't used the Stony Creek in several years. We would use that as a backup supply if we had some issue in the Mohawk River with regard to water quality.
So it's more of an emergency backup?
It is.
Not to replace, maybe asking people not to sprinkle in the summer?
Correct. That's correct. In fact, the water quality in the river is better for us to treat than the water quality from the reservoir, simply because of the constituents that are in it. So, and the river, although it is some high in turbidity sometimes, our experience with the river is very good. So we can tell what we need to do to the water treatment process when we see the raw water quality in the river.
Could that be because we have less manufacturing in New York, that I guess a pleasant byproduct of some of that is better air and cleaner water?
Yeah, but I think we still have the agriculture in the Mohawk River watershed that's an issue,
Right.
and the runoff that's associated with that.
Well, that brings up the problem of people putting fertilizer on their lawn. Any issues with that people should think about?
Yes. The nutrients associated with fertilizer and other uses along the river do create different issues for us as water suppliers. Algae is a big one.
Oh.
So when we see an algal bloom in the river, we know that we have to adjust.
Nitrogen-related?
Nitrogen and phosphorus. Phosphorus probably being the most significant. And I think it's hard to find fertilizers with phosphorus left, because phosphorus is such a potent nutrient, and it creates such a problem with growth in the river, and not just the river, but any water supply. That phosphorus, I think, is a target nutrient. In fact, the DEC has done a study on several water supply sources, and in fact, I'm meeting with the DEC tomorrow to talk about the findings of their study to see exactly what the impacts are. And phosphorus is their most important nutrient, the one that they're targeting the most.
So if people will use fertilizer, they want to have a nice lawn, and I don't guess anybody is trying to tell them not to. But in terms of how they use it, when they put it on, or how they water, are there any advice that you could give to make it more effective for the grass and not be running off?
Well, I'm probably going to sound like a commercial, but really follow the manufacturer's recommendations.
Okay.
Because they're consistent, and they're there for that purpose. Because over fertilizing can obviously be a problem. If the rainwater runs off with a nutrient in it, it ends up in the storm sewer system, which eventually ends up in either the Mohawk River or the Hudson River, and ends up as somebody else's water supply.
Okay. Let's look at pricing a little bit. Does the last gallon of water cost the same as the first gallon? And how do you price water? How do you set the water rates?
The water rate setting is a fairly long process. It begins with the budget process in May of the previous year. We work with the comptroller's office. We'll establish our costs, obviously personnel being the most significant, along with the benefits associated with the personnel. And then projects that we want to take on for that year that we may want to do out of our operation and maintenance budget. And then we work with the comptroller's office to establish an ideal rate to meet that. We're not a profit organization, but we have to cover our costs. So theoretically, the rate that we charge is simply the amount necessary to cover our costs. With regard to your first question, the cost of the first gallon, no, the first gallon will cost more, and that's why we have a minimum charge that we charge our customers.
Because you have to get it there.
Correct. So we still have the same staff at the water treatment plant. We still have to do meter reading. We still have to maintain the distribution system to get the water there. So some of those minimum costs that are going to be there, whether we deliver a gallon to you or 6 million gallons to you over the course of a year. It all is covered by the costs, and that minimum charge covers the cost of the usage up to 20,000 gallons. So if you use less than 20,000, the rate will be the same for you, just to cover those costs, those base costs that we have.
And how typical is that? Let's go into how people use water. And I guess then you can bring in the prices of bigger amounts, like if Pepsi were a bottling plant, they might use millions and millions of gallons. How do we use our water? I mean, I think if people are drinking not enough water, they drink sodas and they drink coffee, and that comes out of the tap, but then we flush the toilet and there's a gallon or two.
Drinking is probably the smallest percentage of water use. When you look at lawn irrigation, landscape irrigation, obviously the industrial uses. Pepsi is still using in the 60 million gallon per year range. So there are still some of those large uses, but from a residential standpoint, the largest usages are probably irrigation, especially in a dry year, and any of the other uses, the flushing the toilet, the dishwasher, the washing machine, the clothes washing machine, any outside, washing the car outside, a lot of those uses. And we can see those increase as the temperature rises, especially the outside, the irrigation and outside water use. So drinking is actually a small portion, but drinking water is used for a lot of other uses in the house, cooking as one.
Right. So does that have any impact on how you plan in terms of, like if Pepsi's using 60 million, that would be, if you added another, say a Coke plant, then you would be adding significant requirements there.
Yep, but remember I talked about our planning process for our water treatment plant upgrade in 2005. So we designed the plant to treat up to 31.5 million gallons of water per day. So I said our average day was about 10 million.
Well, then you've got quite a bit of...
Our peak day, though, can get as high as 22 or 23 million, especially in those dry periods in July and August when everybody wants to water the lawn. And I do myself because I want my lawn to look green. But we do have those peak days, but even when you consider those peak days, we still have almost 8 million gallons of water capacity available at our water treatment plant to meet those demands.
Okay, that sounds pretty good.
Yeah, that was the purpose of our planning process. We wanted to make sure that we had enough water for that period well out into the future.
So in terms of growth, we're good to 2025. If we look more regionally, and we've seen global foundries come in, and then they talk about they need a new pipe, and I imagine this pipe is not a 1-inch pipe like what we get. So they're a intense water use company, and yet they're a major economic driver for our region, and everybody's celebrating that we have them. Could you talk a little bit about the regional implications of our area, the water that we have, and I guess tie it into the economics of our employment situation?
Well, being in the Northeast, Water supply, raw water supply is not an issue.
That's beautiful.
As I talked about a little earlier, that even in the droughts of the 60s, the Mohawk River still had lots of water coming down the river. Hudson River is in the same position, so communities along the Hudson River have the same opportunity. You could say we're flush with water, but we don't want to waste it. But we do have that raw water supply where we can supply a global foundries. In fact, water supply is so important to global foundries that they're spending millions of dollars on a second supply, a backup supply, because a day lost due to a water main break, something like that, something obviously it's a mechanical system, so it's got a reliability issue. They wanted to make sure that they were always going to be up and running. So I think they're getting water from two different suppliers just to make sure, and spending millions to bring that water to their facility, just to make sure that they don't have a loss of water for any period of time. So, when you're looking at the capital region, the infrastructure as a whole is very important to the economic stability and growth potential of the region. Water, electricity, all those facilities, sewer, roadways, and transportation, all very important to the development of the community.
So I guess the amount of money that you have to invest in the infrastructure, it would have a couple components. It's got the growth, which you've already talked about, and we're planning up to 2025. And then it also has, I guess, repair. So what kind of state are we in terms of, it's not the oldest system in the world. Albany has probably got an older water system and more problems. In Troy, we've seen numerous problems over there. How are we in Colonie in terms of repairs and the overall condition of the system?
Well, obviously, we just upgraded the water treatment plant, so we feel pretty confident in those facilities from a reliability standpoint, although they do require maintenance. I mean, we spend $200,000 a year just to change out the media in our filters to continue treating the water to the quality that we have. So every year we know we have to spend at least $200,000 just on that facet. I mean, the budget at the treatment plant is in the millions, but so we feel confident with that. The distribution system does date back to the 20s and some older. And our problem is that you talked about Troy and Albany. They were built often in the 100-year time frame when wall thicknesses and the pipes were much bigger, just because they wanted to throw as much metal, and the metal didn't cost that much, so they made them much thicker. Our problem is the mains that were installed in the 40s and 30s that were a little bit thinner wall. They started to save money for the war, save materials for the war, and the walls are a little bit thinner. Those are the ones, the 6-inch and 8-inch mains that we have a little trouble on because they're smaller and just not quite as strong. Overall, though, the American Society of Civil Engineers rated the water systems in the country as a whole a D. So it's an upgrade from their previous rating, which was a D-, but we're still in the D.
Sounds like our bridges.
The bridges, I think, got a C+ or C-. So they were a little bit better, but the water systems and sewer systems were rated only a D. So I think from that we can discern that we're going to need to invest a lot more in all of our infrastructure. Water being obviously important to me, and that's what we try to do. We try to plan a capital plan with the Comptroller's office and develop a little long-term strategy to replace the infrastructure that's aging and most important to us.
So one more little line of question. Once in a while there's a water restriction. Could you explain why that comes about?
Well, the good news is we haven't had a water restriction since the treatment plant was upgraded in 2005.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Because we have all that capacity at the water treatment plant. Prior to that, the treatment plant was unable to meet those 22, 23 million gallon per day days. So once we upgraded the plant, we didn't have that anymore. We didn't have that need because we can meet those 23 million gallon per day days easily with the capacity that's in our treatment plant now.
Now, this program will air especially in the next few weeks, and I know that you're having a drinking water week. Does that run a month or just a week?
No, it is just a week, running from May 5th through the 11th of this year. It's a national program started by the American Water Works Association, which is the member organization that Latham Water has been a member of since 1952. It represents 50,000 water professionals across the country, water suppliers like Latham Water, engineering companies, suppliers to the water suppliers throughout the country. And they've established May 5 through 11 as Drinking Water Week. we're going to have a booth down at the Empire State Plaza that week, which is going to be manned by staff from water suppliers, from some of the other local water representatives like the New York Rural Water Association, the New York section of the American Water Works Association, those statewide organizations that help water supply professionals deliver water to their customers. So I'll be down there on Wednesday of that week as part of the program, so that we're going to have a brochure that a statewide committee put together on the value of water to help do what we're doing here today, to help get the idea out that water is important and that we need to consider water infrastructure as we move into the future.
Well, we look at some of the news, and if we look at Africa, and we see countries where sometimes their whole ecology is being destroyed, and more desert is being created. And then other places where the water is in such bad shape that people are going to companies like Nestle to buy a bottle of water because the pollution is so bad. So I guess this is kind of a celebration week also. Could we look at it that way, that we should be grateful?
It is absolutely a celebration when you consider the water quality that we have, chlorine being the most significant advent to help human health in the early 20th century as being a primary factor in saving lives. I think we've come to take that for granted, and that's partially our fault because we haven't. Water mains are underground, out of sight, out of mind.
And we're glad.
That's right. But people have taken it for granted, and we haven't done a good job of telling people what we do. So I think Drinking Water Week affords us a perfect opportunity to do that.
Awesome, John. This has been really interesting.
Great. I enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show, that you tune in again next time, and that you have a great week. Take care. Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.